They say the Atlantic off the coast of Bar Harbor, Maine, has secrets it will never give up. But when a 61-year-old fisherman spotted a tightly tied sack bobbing against the tide just before dawn, something in his gut told him this wasn't just another piece of trash drifting in the cold waters. He tried to ignore it, but the sack wouldn't drift away, almost as if the ocean itself was forcing him to notice it. When he finally pulled it aboard and felt its unnatural weight, he hesitated, his breath turning white in the morning air. And when the authorities arrived and saw what spilled out after he cut the rope, they turned pale, unable to explain how this could be here. Would you have the courage to cut it open if it were you? Tell me below, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. They called him Old Sam. 61 years on this earth, and nearly 50 of them spent on the waters around Bar Harbor, Maine. Sam Delaney was the kind of man who would still rise before dawn, sliding quietly out of his weathered cottage while the town was wrapped in blue fog, boots crunching over the frost-bitten gravel. His boat, the Wind's Mercy, was already waiting, bobbing gently at the dock, a creaking reminder of the years they had spent together, hauling in lobster traps and the occasional forgotten anchor, things that belonged to the sea and things that the sea decided to give back. Sam was not wealthy, nor did he crave wealth. He had a steady rhythm, up at 4, lines checked by 5, traps pulled by 7, back by midday to clean and sort before heading home for a simple meal, coffee, a glance out at the harbor, and to bed. The ocean was a breathing thing to him, and he respected it, reading the air and the shifting currents with the calm certainty only decades on water could teach. That morning was meant to be like every other. The air was sharp enough to make his eyes water as he untied the ropes and pushed off. He guided the Wind's Mercy past the dark outlines of moored sailboats, the water slapping softly against the hull as if reminding him that the tide was turning in. His radio crackled occasionally with other fishermen checking in, voices low and steady, talking about the cold, about the wind, about the traps. Sam's mind was on the traps that morning, hoping to find enough lobster to trade with the local buyer to keep the fuel tank full and groceries covered. The tide was in his favor, and he moved to where his buoys floated like patient sentinels in the dawn. The light was shifting from deep blue to that pale, hesitant gold that makes the world look almost honest for a moment. Sam felt it, that small, comforting reassurance that the day would pass quietly, that everything would remain the same. But then, something caught his eye. At first, it was nothing, just a dark shape moving oddly with the tide about 30 yards from his line of traps. It didn't look like a lobster buoy, and it wasn't drifting the way seaweed usually does. He adjusted the throttle slightly, leaning forward, squinting, trying to catch the reflection of the shape in the new light. A gull flew overhead, shrieking, then curved away into the wind. The closer he got, the clearer it became that it wasn't a log either. It was a sack, dark and heavy, tied tightly at the top with thick rope that looked almost too new against the faded canvas. It bobbed gently, but it wasn't drifting freely. It was snagged on something beneath, caught on the edge of a hidden rock or tangled in the seaweed forest below. Sam's hands tightened on the wheel. He felt it then, a ripple in the air, the kind of instinct that tells you something is off, even if your eyes can't quite explain why. Sam killed the engine, letting the boat coast until it nudged close enough for him to hook the sack with his gaff. The water lapped gently as he lifted it, feeling the sudden weight drag against his shoulder. It was heavy, far heavier than it should have been for its size. He managed to drag it over the rail, the wet canvas slapping onto the deck with a dull, lifeless thud. Water pooled around it, seeping from the bottom, and the smell that rose was not just salt water but something else. Metallic, damp, old. Sam stood there, staring down at the tied sack on the deck, feeling the sway of the boat beneath him. The rope was knotted expertly, thick and clean, the ends burned to prevent fraying, the kind of knot you use when you don't want something to open by accident, or when you don't want it to open at all. For a moment he thought about tossing it back. Whatever it wasn't his business, wasn't part of the ocean's agreement with him. But something in him, a quiet, crawling curiosity, wouldn't let him. He reached down, touching the rope, feeling how tightly it was cinched. He could hear his heart, louder than the gulls, louder than the gentle slap of water against the Wind's Mercy. He could have left it there and pretended he never saw it, but the weight of it felt like a question he couldn't leave unanswered, and the cold breeze across the deck only made the smell sharper. Sam pulled back, sat on the edge of his bench, and ran a hand over his unshaven face, trying to decide. That was when he noticed something else. A small tear in the bottom of the sack, just big enough to see something dark inside, like a piece of soaked fabric or maybe leather. He leaned closer, squinting, trying to make out what it was, but the sack shifted, the contents settling in a way that made the deck creak under the sudden movement. Sam froze, watching the ripple of the bag, the way it seemed to breathe for a moment before going still again. He pulled out his old utility knife, the blade still sharp from frequent honing. He crouched down, knife in hand, the tip resting against the rope knot, hesitating. The smell was stronger now, and there was something in the air, a tension that made his shoulders tighten without him realizing it. He thought of the stories he'd heard at the docks, of drugs washed up in hidden packages, of smugglers losing shipments to the tide, of stranger things the ocean sometimes gave back. He made the first cut, slow and careful, slicing through one of the ropes, letting it fall away. The bag loosened, shifting, and he pulled back instinctively as the water that had pooled inside gushed out, darkening the deck, spreading the sharp smell of salt and something metallic, something like rust, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He pulled the rope aside, revealing more of the soaked canvas, his breath clouding in the air as he moved to open it further. But the bag was heavy, and he realized quickly that whatever was inside wasn't going to come out easily. He could see now that the dark fabric inside was wrapped around something, and the way it settled made it clear that it was solid, not just a bundle of trash. Sam stood up, looking around at the empty horizon, the lonely expanse of water stretching out in every direction, the early morning sun creeping higher, turning the surface into a field of rippling gold. There was no one else around, no one to see what he had found, no one to tell him what to do next. He was alone with the sack, alone with the decision that was now pressing against him as heavily as the weight of the waterlogged canvas on his deck. A part of him wanted to just retie the rope and toss it back overboard, to let the sea reclaim whatever it was that had ended up in that sack, to pretend that the morning had been as quiet and uneventful as every other morning before it. But the other part, the part that had made him a fisherman all these years, the part that listened to the sea and knew its moods, told him that whatever was inside that sack was important, that it needed to be seen, that it needed to be known. He grabbed the knife again, this time sliding it under the seam of the sack, pulling it upward, the canvas tearing with a rough, wet sound. A stronger wave of the metallic smell hit him, and he had to pull back, covering his nose with his arm, eyes watering from the sting of it. He looked down, blinking, trying to see through the tears, trying to see what was inside, and for a moment, he couldn't understand what he was seeing. There was fabric, dark and soaked, but beneath it was something pale, something that looked almost like... Sam's heart thudded in his chest and he staggered back, the knife clattering to the deck as he tried to catch his breath. He stared down at the opening in the sack, at the pale shape that was barely visible through the soaked fabric, at the way it shifted as the boat rocked, as if it was moving on its own. The ocean was quiet around him, the only sound the gentle slap of water against the hull, the call of a distant gull, the whisper of the wind through the rigging. The world felt too quiet, too still, as Sam stared down at the sack, at the thing inside it, at the shape that was slowly becoming clearer as the water drained away, as the fabric shifted, as the early morning light finally reached it. He stumbled back, sitting heavily on the bench, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his eyes wide, staring, unable to look away, unable to process what he was seeing. The pale shape was unmistakable now, the curve of it, the way it bent at the middle, the way it ended in a smaller, rounded point. It was a bone, long and pale, stripped clean by the salt water, but still unmistakably a bone. And it wasn't just any bone. Sam felt the world tilt around him. The cold morning suddenly colder, the sunlight suddenly too harsh, the gentle rocking of the boat suddenly too violent. He closed his eyes, trying to steady himself, trying to calm the pounding in his chest, trying to make sense of what he had just found. When he opened his eyes again, the sack was still there, the pale bone still visible through the torn opening, the smell still sharp in the air, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him like the tide. He knew then that he couldn't just leave it, couldn't just pretend it wasn't there. He reached for his radio, his hand trembling as he lifted it, pressing the button, his voice rough as he called for the harbor authorities. telling them that he had found something, something he didn't understand, something that needed to be seen. As he waited for a response, the boat rocked gently beneath him, the sack shifting, the pale bone inside catching the light. A quiet reminder that the sea keeps its secrets until it doesn't, that sometimes it decides to give something back, and when it does, it demands to be seen. The radio crackled, a hiss of static cutting through the cold morning air, before the familiar voice of Harbor Officer Lane came through, steady and clipped, asking Sam to repeat what he'd found. Sam's eyes remained locked on the tied sack on the deck, on the pale bone that peeked from beneath the torn canvas, the salt-stiffened rope lying coiled around it like a dead snake. His thumb pressed the button on the radio, his voice lower than he intended, as if he was afraid of being heard by something else, something watching from the water. "I've got a sack. Heavy. Found a bone inside, Lane. It's human, I think." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for Sam to hear the gulls again, distant and indifferent. Then Lane's voice came back, sharper now, the authority bleeding into each word. "Stay where you are, Sam. Do not touch anything else. We're on our way." The radio went silent, leaving Sam alone with the lapping water and the morning sun creeping higher over the horizon. He sat back, the knife still on the deck, its blade glinting, reflecting the pale light like a warning. The smell coming from the sack had grown stronger now that it was open, mixing with the tang of salt and engine oil, a scent that made Sam's stomach twist every time the breeze shifted. He stood, pacing slowly across the small deck, his boots creaking on the damp wood, eyes darting back to the sack, unable to look away for long. The ocean around him seemed too quiet, too calm, as if it were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The horizon was empty, no other boats nearby, no sign of life beyond the lonely cries of the gulls riding the cold updrafts above. Sam found himself talking out loud, a habit he had picked up after years alone at sea. "What the hell are you doing here?" he muttered to the sack, as if it might answer, as if it might explain how a human bone ended up tied in a sack, floating in the cold Atlantic off Bar Harbor. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the roughness of his unshaven jaw, the chill in the air biting at the sweat that had started to bead on his forehead. He glanced at the clock on the dash of the Wind's Mercy, counting the minutes since he had called for help. Each second dragged like an anchor, pulling at his nerves, making the quiet too loud. He looked back at the sack, at the dark fabric inside, at the pale shape of the bone. Part of him wanted to open it fully, to see what else was inside, to get the full truth before the authorities arrived. But another part, the part that felt the hair on his arms rise every time the boat rocked and the sack shifted, told him to wait, to leave it alone. But waiting was never easy for a fisherman. Waiting was the hardest part of the job. The hours spent staring at empty water, at lines that didn't move, at traps that came up empty. Sam felt the weight of the waiting press down on him now, heavy and cold, like the sack itself. He moved closer, crouching beside the sack, careful not to touch it. He studied the rope, the knots, the fabric, trying to see if there was any marking, any clue about where it came from. But there was nothing. Just the rough weave of the canvas, the dark stains of salt water, and something darker, something that looked like it might have been blood once, washed out by the sea but still there if you looked closely enough. The bone, now partially exposed, was long and curved, stripped clean, but Sam could see the faint marks along its length, small scratches, indentations, the kind of marks that spoke of something more violent than the gentle pull of the tide. He swallowed, his mouth dry, the taste of salt on his tongue. He found himself wondering about the person this bone belonged to. Who were they? How did they end up in the ocean, tied in a sack, left to drift with the tide until Sam found them? He imagined them, a ghostly figure floating beneath the waves, pulled along by the currents, waiting for someone to find them, to bring them back to the surface, to tell their story. Sam shook his head, trying to clear the thoughts, trying to focus. The sun was higher now, the light harsher, throwing sharp reflections off the water, making it hard to see. He adjusted his cap, squinting against the glare, scanning the horizon for any sign of the harbor patrol. Still nothing, just empty water, empty sky, the steady, endless breathing of the sea. The sack shifted again, the contents settling, and a new wave of the metallic smell hit Sam, making him gag. He stood quickly, moving to the edge of the boat, taking deep breaths of the cold, clean air, trying to clear the scent from his lungs. He glanced back, and in that moment, he saw something else in the torn opening of the sack, something glinting. Sam froze, turning back, stepping closer, peering into the dark interior of the sack. There, half hidden beneath the soaked fabric, was something metallic, catching the light, reflecting it back in a small, sharp beam. His heart thudded, curiosity and fear warring inside him. He grabbed a boat hook, using it to nudge the fabric aside, careful not to touch it directly. The fabric fell back, revealing the object fully. It was a small metal box, about the size of a lunch pail, rusted but still intact, with a heavy latch holding it closed. The box was tied to the bone with a thin rope, wrapped around several times, the knots tight and deliberate. Sam stared at it, the metal box and the bone tied together like some kind of grim package floating in the ocean, waiting for him to find it. His mind raced with possibilities. Drugs? Money? Evidence of a crime long forgotten? Or something else? Something darker? Something he couldn't yet imagine. He reached for the radio again, his hand trembling, pressing the button. "Lane, you there?" he said, his voice cracking. "I'm here, Sam." Lane's voice came back, calm but urgent. "There's more. There's a metal box in the sack, tied to the bone. You better hurry. We're close, Sam. Just stay put." Sam lowered the radio, looking back at the box. The way it was tied, the deliberate knots, the weight of it, all spoke of intention. Someone had put this in the ocean on purpose, tied it to the remains of a person, sealed it in a sack, and sent it out to sea. Why? To hide it? To get rid of it? To send a message? The questions were too many, pressing in on him, making it hard to breathe. He backed away, sitting again, keeping his eyes on the sack, on the bone, on the box. The boat rocked gently, the water slapping against the hull, the morning breeze ruffling his hair. But Sam felt none of it. All he could see was the sack and its contents, the secrets it held, the mystery it carried, and the feeling that whatever was in that box was important, that it would change everything once it was opened. And you, watching this now, what would you do if you were in Sam's place? Would you open the box, right there on your boat, with no one else around, with the cold sea watching you, waiting? Or would you wait for the authorities, for the safety of others, for the comfort of not being alone when the truth came spilling out? Let me know down in the comments what you would do if you found a sack like this tied to a human bone in the ocean. And don't forget to hit the like button if you're as intrigued as I am about what's inside that box. Subscribe to the channel if you want to follow the rest of this story, because trust me, it's about to get even stranger. As Sam waited, the minutes stretched, the boat drifting slightly, the tide pulling at it gently, the sack shifting with every wave, the box inside glinting in the light, a promise of secrets waiting to be revealed. Sam found himself staring at it, unable to look away, the curiosity clawing at him, the need to know growing stronger with each passing moment. He stood, taking a step forward, then stopping, running a hand through his hair, breathing heavily. The world seemed to narrow, shrinking down to the small space on the deck, to the sack, the bone, the box. The ocean faded, the sounds of the gulls disappeared, the breeze became silent. All that remained was the mystery, the weight of it pressing down on him, demanding to be seen, demanding to be known. And in that moment, Sam knew that nothing would be the same after this, that whatever was inside that box would change everything, that the sea had given up one of its secrets, and it was now his to carry, his to uncover, his to understand. He crouched down, eyes locked on the box, reaching out slowly, his hand trembling as it hovered over the rusted metal, the cold air biting at his skin, the sound of his breath loud in his ears. The box was there, waiting, patient, silent, holding its secrets close, waiting for the moment it would finally be opened. The sound of the harbor patrol's engine broke the heavy silence, a low rumble growing louder as the white vessel came into view across the glinting water. Sam didn't move from where he stood, eyes fixed on the sack, the bone, and that rusted metal box still glinting from within the torn canvas. The presence of the patrol boat should have brought comfort, but it only made the weight of what he had found feel heavier, more real. The patrol boat pulled alongside the wind's mercy with practiced ease, its hull thumping softly against Sam's weathered boat as fenders cushioned the contact. Two officers in dark jackets moved quickly, securing lines before one of them, Officer Lane, climbed over, his boots landing on Sam's deck with a dull thud that seemed too loud in the morning air. Lane was younger than Sam, but carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen the ocean's darker offerings. His eyes flicked briefly to Sam, reading the tightness in his shoulders, the way his jaw worked as if holding back words. Then Lane's gaze fell to the sack. "Is this it?" he asked, his voice measured, though his eyes had sharpened as he caught sight of the pale bone and the rusted box within the tangled fabric. Sam nodded, his throat dry. "That's it. I didn't touch the box. It's tied to the bone." Lane crouched carefully, pulling on a pair of blue gloves with a practiced snap before reaching out to shift the canvas with deliberate caution. The other officer, a stockier man named Torres, came aboard carrying a camera, immediately beginning to document the scene with sharp clicks that seemed to puncture the stillness around them. The smell rose again as Lane shifted the fabric further, and Torres grimaced but continued his work, moving around to capture every angle, the camera's flash occasionally reflecting off the wet deck and the metal box. Lane's gloved fingers traced the rope tying the box to the bone, examining the knots with the calm focus of a man who knew the smallest details could matter most. "This knot? It's a bowline," Lane murmured, mostly to himself. "Clean, tight." Someone knew what they were doing. Sam stood back, arms folded, the wind pulling at his jacket as he watched. He could feel the unspoken question hanging between them all. Who ties a human bone to a metal box and sends it into the sea? Torres lowered the camera. "You said you didn't open it?" he asked Sam, pointing to the box. "No," Sam replied, shaking his head. "Didn't think it was my place." Lane glanced up, giving Sam a small nod of approval before looking back at the box. "It's better that way," he said. "Chain of evidence." But even Lane's calm words couldn't hide the tension in the air as he examined the latch on the box. It was rusted but intact, the kind of latch that needed to be forced open if it was stuck. Lane looked over his shoulder at Torres. "Get the evidence kit." Torres returned to the patrol boat and came back with a black case, opening it on the deck, revealing plastic bags, tools, and a handheld camera for documentation. Lane picked up the camera, pointing it down at the box as he narrated softly for the record. Inspection of the box found at sea, tied to what appears to be a human femur, preparing to open. The words felt unreal to Sam as he heard them, as if this moment were happening in some other world, far from the quiet waters of Bar Harbor, far from the life he had known on these tides. Lane slipped a small pry bar under the latch, pressing carefully, the rust groaning as metal fought against metal, flakes falling away, landing with tiny taps on the damp deck. Then, with a final crack, the latch gave way, the sound making Sam flinch despite himself. Lane paused, glancing at Torres, then back to the box. He lifted the lid slowly. A sharp, metallic smell, different from the scent of the sea and the decay around the bone, rose from the open box. Lane leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing as he studied the contents before looking up at Torres, who began taking photos, each flash cutting through the morning light like a silent alarm. Inside the box was a collection of items, arranged with unsettling care. There was a small, leather-bound notebook, swollen from water but still holding together, its pages yellowed and clinging to each other. Beside it was an old, rusted pocket watch, its glass cracked, the hands frozen at 2:17. There was also a small, black-and-white photograph, water-stained but intact, showing what appeared to be a young woman in a summer dress, standing on a rocky shoreline, smiling at the camera, the ocean behind her blurred in sunlight. And then there was a ring, gold, with a small sapphire, resting in the corner of the box, tied to a piece of string as if someone had wanted to keep it from drifting away even inside the box. Lane reached for the ring with his gloved fingers, lifting it carefully, turning it toward the light. There were initials etched inside, barely visible. CR. Sam felt the chill of the morning deepen around him, the pieces inside the box speaking of a life, a story, something lost that had found its way back in the most haunting way possible. The photograph, the ring, the watch, the notebook, all of them tied to the bone beside them. A silent, heavy testimony to something that had happened, something that had ended in the cold embrace of the Atlantic. Lane placed each item carefully into evidence bags, labeling them with steady hands, but his eyes betrayed the same questions that were now screaming in Sam's mind. Who was the woman in the photograph? Who did the ring belong to? Why were these personal treasures tied to a human bone, sealed in a box, and sent into the sea? As Lane lifted the notebook, water dripped from its edges, splattering on the deck. "We'll need to dry this out, see if we can get anything from the pages," he said quietly. Sam nodded, but his eyes remained on the photograph, burned into his mind. The young woman's smile now an unsettling contrast to the grim reality of the bone and the box that had carried her image through the sea. Torres stepped away, speaking into his radio, calling for additional support and a forensics team to meet them at the dock. Lane closed the box, sealing it in a large evidence bag, then turned to Sam, his expression softer now, human beneath the uniform. "You did the right thing, Sam. This could be important, could be a missing person, a cold case, something that needs closure." Sam swallowed hard, the taste of salt still on his lips. "Feels wrong finding something like this, like the ocean wanted me to see it." Lane glanced back at the water, the waves now sparkling under the climbing sun, the world looking deceptively calm. "Sometimes the sea gives things back when it's time," he said. "Maybe it's time for this to be found." They secured the evidence, preparing to transfer it back to the harbor, but before leaving, Lane turned back to Sam. "We're going to need you to give a full statement, and if you remember anything else, anything unusual about where you found it, tides, anything, let us know." Sam nodded. "I'll come in after I dock her." Lane placed a hand on Sam's shoulder, a brief, steady pressure that felt like an anchor in the moment. Then he and Torres stepped back onto the patrol boat, starting the engine, preparing to head back, the evidence secured, the mystery now officially in the hands of the authorities. Sam watched them go, the patrol boat cutting through the water, leaving a white wake that spread across the blue. He turned back to his deck, to the faint stain where the sack had lain, to the coil of rope left behind, to the quiet that had returned, heavier now, filled with the weight of unanswered questions. He leaned on the rail, looking out at the horizon, the gulls wheeling in the sky, the tide shifting as the morning gave way to the full light of day. The sea was calm again, as if nothing had happened, as if it hadn't given up one of its secrets, as if it hadn't changed everything. Sam closed his eyes, breathing in the salt air, letting the wind wash over him, trying to find the rhythm of the ocean again, the steady pulse that had always guided him. But beneath it, there was something else now, a whisper of a mystery that would not leave him, that would not let him rest. And you, watching this, what do you think was inside that notebook? A confession? Coordinates to something else hidden beneath the waves? A farewell from someone who knew they wouldn't return? Drop your theories in the comments, because this story is far from over, and your ideas might be the key to unlocking what truly happened. Don't forget to hit the like button if you're following this mystery, and subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next, because the sea has a way of keeping its secrets until it decides it's time to reveal them. As Sam turned the wind's mercy back toward the harbor, the weight of what he had found remained heavy in the air. The gentle roll of the waves beneath him a reminder that the ocean remembers everything, and sometimes it chooses to remind us too. Back on land, the evidence was rushed to a small, windowless room at the Bar Harbor police station, the salty air still clinging to the items as if the ocean were reluctant to let go. The box, the bone, the photograph, the ring, and the waterlogged notebook were spread out on a metal table beneath the harsh glow of overhead lights, while Officer Lane stood beside a local forensics specialist, Marcy Thomas, who had come in despite the early hour, curiosity and duty driving her forward. Sam sat outside the room, staring at his calloused hands, the smell of salt water still in his lungs, the image of the smiling woman on the photograph flashing through his mind every time he blinked. The rhythmic tick of the wall clock in the hallway was a quiet but constant reminder that time was moving, that whatever they found inside that notebook could pull a hidden truth from the dark into the light. Inside, Marcy carefully lifted the notebook with gloved hands, placing it on a white tray lined with absorbent pads, the water dripping in slow, deliberate taps. She adjusted a small desk lamp, the bright circle of light illuminating the swollen leather cover as she flipped it open, the pages clinging together, fragile and threatening to crumble with each gentle pull. Lane stood over her shoulder, his breath held, his eyes locked on the slow revelation of words that had spent years, or perhaps decades, pressed together under salt water and time. Marcy used a plastic spatula to ease the pages apart, placing small weights at the corners to hold them open under the light. Faint lines of ink, warped and faded, began to appear on the pages, the ghost of handwriting curling across the paper like seaweed drifting in water. Lane leaned closer, squinting, reading aloud as the words became clear. June 17, 1972. The sea is calm today, but my heart is not. I see her face every time I close my eyes, hear her laughter in the waves. Lane's voice caught as he glanced at Marcy, who met his eyes with a tight nod, encouraging him to continue. I made a promise that day, standing on the rocks where we first met, that I would never let her go. Even now, with the storm clouds gathering, I can't let go. If you find this, please know I did what I had to do. The next few pages were water-streaked, the ink running like tears down the paper, but fragments could still be read. Mentions of a name, Caroline, repeated several times, along with phrases like, "She deserved better," and "I couldn't watch her fade away." There were also cryptic references to the ring, the watch, and the promise we made by the lighthouse. Marcy paused, looking up at Lane, her gloved finger tapping lightly on the name, Caroline. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" she asked softly. Lane nodded, rubbing a hand over his mouth, processing the pieces. Caroline, CR on the ring. Could be the same Caroline. They turned the page carefully, revealing a final entry, dated just days after the first, the ink darker here, as if the writer had pressed the pen harder, the desperation bleeding into the page. "I can't let the sea take her without me. She loved the water, but I know now it's the only place we can be together forever. When you find us, know that it was love that brought us here." Marcy's eyes softened, the harshness of her professional focus momentarily slipping as the story beneath the words became clear. Lane exhaled, a slow, heavy breath, before stepping back, looking down at the table where the photograph of the smiling woman lay beside the notebook. "Caroline," he repeated softly, the name hanging in the sterile room like a memory. Sam was called in, and he stepped into the room, the smell of bleach and wet paper mixing with the lingering scent of the sea that clung to his clothes. Lane nodded at him, gesturing to the table. "We found a name," Lane said quietly. "Caroline, we think this might have been a lover's pact, or maybe something else." Sam's eyes moved to the photograph, to the ring, to the notebook open to the desperate final entry. He swallowed, his voice rough. "What about the box? Why tie it to the bone and let it drift like that?" Lane shook his head. "We don't know yet, but it looks like whoever wrote this wanted to keep her memory close. Maybe it was meant as a burial, a way of letting the sea take her, or them, together." Marcy added, "There's something else. I checked missing persons records from the 70s for Bar Harbor and surrounding counties. There was a Caroline Roberts reported missing in July 1972, last seen near the old lighthouse on the South Point." Sam closed his eyes briefly. The lighthouse had been abandoned for decades, standing as a silent watcher over the jagged rocks where waves shattered themselves endlessly. He had fished near those rocks many times, never knowing that beneath the tides the sea had held on to this story. Lane stepped forward, placing a hand on Sam's arm. "We wouldn't have found this without you. You gave her a chance to be remembered." But as the moment settled, a question burned in the room, unspoken but undeniable. If this was a lover's pact, where was the rest of Caroline? Why only a bone? And why the box? Had someone tried to give her a burial? Or was there a darker truth hidden beneath the calm words of the notebook? Marcy voiced it first, her eyes meeting Lane's. "What if this wasn't a lover's pact at all? What if it was something else, and this notebook is just one side of a story we don't fully understand?" Lane nodded slowly. "That's what we need to find out." They prepared to send the notebook for further restoration and analysis, hoping that more pages could be recovered to piece together the missing parts of the story. The ring would be tested for DNA, as would the bone, in hopes of confirming if it was indeed Caroline's, or if this was something entirely different, something darker, hidden beneath decades of tides and silence. As Sam left the station, stepping into the bright midday sun, the harbor in the distance shimmering with the restless dance of waves, he felt the weight of the mystery pressing on him. He looked back once. The image of the photograph burned into his mind, the smiling woman standing on the rocks, the wind in her hair, the sea behind her, a moment frozen before everything changed. And you, watching this now, what do you think truly happened to Caroline? Do you believe this was a lover's pact that ended with a tragic decision? Or is there something darker hidden within those missing pages? Something the sea tried to keep secret for decades? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because your perspective could help unravel what really happened out there. If you're as invested in this mystery as I am, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you can follow along as we uncover more hidden stories the ocean tries to keep. Because this is far from over, and the next discovery might change everything we think we know about Caroline, the man who wrote those words, and what the tides have truly been hiding all these years. As Sam walked back to the wind's mercy, preparing to return to the waters that had given him this mystery, the sea stretched out before him, calm on the surface, but hiding depths he would never fully understand. The tides whispered, the gulls called, and beneath the waves, the past stirred, waiting, patient, ready to reveal more when the time was right. And this time, Sam would be ready to listen. The days that followed moved with the rhythm of the tide, slow but inevitable, pulling the mystery deeper into the hearts of those who had touched it. Sam returned to the sea, but every ripple seemed different now, every pull of the tide whispering questions he could not silence. Each time he passed near the old lighthouse, its weathered silhouette cutting the horizon, he found himself staring, trying to imagine Caroline there, laughing, the wind in her hair, unaware of how her story would vanish beneath the waves. The town buzzed quietly with the discovery. Fishermen spoke in hushed tones at the docks, and the diner where Sam often had coffee was filled with theories. Some believed it was a tragic lover's pact. Others whispered of darker truths, of betrayals, of crimes hidden beneath the cover of a summer romance gone wrong. At the station, Lane and Marcy worked tirelessly, piecing together what fragments they could from the notebook. More pages were recovered, words faded but still speaking, telling of love, of sickness, of promises made at the water's edge. The man who had written them, his name it seemed was Richard, spoke of Caroline's illness, of her fear of hospitals, of her wish to see the sea one last time. But the words shifted as the pages went on, the tone changing, the handwriting more frantic, edges of the pages torn and water-warped, the ink bleeding like wounds. She's gone, but I see her everywhere. I can't let her go. If the sea takes her, it takes me too. Then a final entry. I hear her in the waves. She calls to me. Tonight, we return to the water. The simplicity of the words should have closed the case, should have marked it as a sad love story that ended in the cold arms of the Atlantic. But the bone, the single femur, told a different story. The DNA tests returned. It was Caroline's, but there was no record of Richard ever being found, no trace of his remains, no evidence that he had followed through on the promise the notebook hinted at. And then there was the box itself. Inside the false bottom, Marcy discovered something no one expected. A small, tightly rolled piece of parchment sealed in wax that had somehow survived the salt and the years. When carefully unrolled, it revealed a rough, hand-drawn map of the coastline, with a single X marked near the base of the lighthouse, accompanied by one sentence in tight, shaking script. Where we began, we will end. Lane brought the map to Sam, unrolling it on the deck of the Wind's Mercy as the morning mist lifted, revealing the cold, clear waters around the lighthouse. The gulls cried overhead and the sea rippled, calm but hiding truths Sam felt in his bones. You want to help us look? Lane asked, his eyes holding the weight of everything they had found and everything they hadn't. Sam looked out at the lighthouse, then back at Lane, nodding slowly. If it was her wish, maybe it's time to bring her the rest of the way home. They launched the search that morning using sonar equipment borrowed from the Coast Guard to scan the rocky shallows around the lighthouse. Hours passed, the tide shifting, the hum of the equipment filling the air as the screen showed the jagged shapes of rocks beneath the water. Then a shape appeared, rectangular, out of place among the natural contours of the sea floor. Divers were sent down, braving the sharp currents and the cold that seeped into bones despite thick wetsuits. Sam watched from the deck, heart pounding with each minute that passed, the ocean's surface betraying nothing of what it hid below. When the divers resurfaced, they brought with them a small, corroded metal chest, its sides covered in barnacles, seaweed trailing from its edges like the long hair of a drowned ghost. It was placed on the deck, dripping, the water pooling around it, smelling of rust and salt and secrets. Lane knelt beside it, prying open the corroded latch. The hinges screamed. and the chest opened. Inside were bones, smaller, more fragile, but unmistakably human. A skull resting atop the collection, the empty eye sockets facing the sky, the mouth frozen in silence. Beside the bones was a single object, the other half of the broken pocket watch found in the first box, its hands also frozen at 2:17. A small slip of metal fell from between the bones as Lane lifted the watch, clattering onto the deck. Sam bent, picking it up. It was a locket, rusted but intact, and as he pried it open, a faded photograph inside revealed Caroline's face again, smiling, alive, a memory captured before the sea claimed her. It was Richard. There was no note, no confession, no explanation of how he ended up in that chest beneath the lighthouse, no hint of whether it had been love, desperation, or something darker that led him there. The sea had kept its secrets, only giving them back when it decided it was time. And even then, it gave them back in pieces, enough to haunt, enough to question, enough to leave the story forever unfinished. Back on shore, as the remains were taken away, Lane turned to Sam, who stood watching the waves, the lighthouse looming behind him, the cries of the gulls mixing with the wind. "We may never know the whole story," Lane said quietly. Sam nodded. "The sea knows," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "And that's enough. And you, watching this now, what do you believe truly happened between Caroline and Richard on those rocks beneath the lighthouse all those years ago? Was it a final act of love, or was it something else, something darker the sea tried to wash away? Let me know what you think in the comments below, because your theories might help others see the hidden pieces in this puzzle that even the tides couldn't fully erase. If you found yourself drawn into this story, if the mystery of the ocean and the secrets it holds fascinate you as much as they fascinate me, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to this channel for more true, mysterious disappearance stories from the depths of forgotten waters. Comment below with your theory, and turn on notifications so you never miss when the next secret comes floating to the surface, because the ocean never truly forgets. And sometimes it calls to those willing to listen. Like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications to ensure maximum audience retention and community engagement for your channel.